Hello and welcome to the webinar on the new NIS2 directive for the European Union. The NIS2 directive has been published just a couple of weeks ago, and in this webinar we are going to deal with the most recent version. There have been a couple of changes, in fact. So yeah, let's get started. My name is Marcel Kisch. I'm working for Verve since last year. I've been in OT security for a while. I worked for KPMG, performed security reviews and audits in that space, and for IBM I built basically OT security solution coverage. Verve Industrial has the 30-year anniversary this year. So we are around since a while. Company has initially performed control system integrations. So strong focus on operational engineering. And like 15 years ago, clients started asking for security coverage because of NIS2. So that's basically was the moment when the software solution was born, the Verve Security Center. And that's 15 years ago now. So we can look back on a track of experience throughout time with proven technology. And I will provide some insights and how this can help with complying to the NIS2 directive for you. Apart from the software, we also provide services for clients. So implementation services mainly, and we still do systems integrations. So we never lost the roots, so to say. However, Verve is set up in the European Union, in North America, in Canada, Middle East as well. And yeah. Okay, today's agenda. First of all, quick introduction. What was the impact of the previous NIS version? So what to expect? What's in scope of NIS2? What are the requirements? We will walk through a sample scenario, talk about supervision, basically government supervision, and then give some guidance on where and how to start. We have had a couple of questions collected, and I will answer them while going through the slides. If you have questions throughout or at the end, please feel free. We have some time at the end to address these questions. Okay, quick takeaway. NIS Directive number 1 has been pretty significant for the entities in scope. Here you can see the security spending on external factors. And you can see that the NIS directive is in the top bracket of the reason for security spending. You can expect that these numbers will go up just because the amount of entities have been multiplied now with the NIS2 directive. And yeah, let's jump into that. The NIS2 directive is not a regulation yet. In order for that to be a regulation and also like law, it has to be applied by the local member states. So what we discussed today is going to be the minimum requirement, and the different countries in Europe will have the freedom to increase their own requirements to their liking. From a timeline perspective, a lot of entities preparations have to be completed until October 24. That's like 18 to 20 months from now, and will become effective and be reviewed January 25. So this is basically the time frame that we have to basically implement the according controls. NIS2 puts two entity types in scope. One is called essential. The other one, a little less important, is considered important, or less essential, is considered important. And there are specific requirements around cybersecurity risk management measures defined. That's one section, and the other section is going to be reporting requirements in terms of a severe security incident. This is basically surrounded by a network of supervision, enforcement, penalties, and fines. And an early question has been, how far is OT actually in scope? So OT is not directly mentioned, but there are a lot of indications that operational technology, cyber physical systems are going to be in scope. There are a couple of examples on the box on the bottom right side. And basically, bottom line is you can consider that OT systems are going to be in scope, especially because they will have an impact on the availability of critical services. So let's look a little deeper into essential and important entities. So first of all, only medium and large size enterprises are in scope. And you can see that here in the graph at the bottom. So basically, if you have more than 50 million revenue, you have additionally more than 249 employees and more than 43 million euro balance. If all of these are true, then you are considered a large size entity and you are going to be in scope if you are mentioned in Annex 1 of that directive. And to make it a little easier, Annex 1 is in the box on the right side. So these are the industries, and then you can see the subsectors within these industries. The directive is providing more detail and also links to other regulations that help to identify, but this is like the broad picture. You can see that now it's not only energy, it's health, pharma, manufacturing, even in the Annex 1 already. And new, by the way, the latest change is information system or managed security provider and managed security services providers are going to be in scope if they are large sized, they are going to be handled as an essential entity with a little stricter requirements. And if they are medium sized, they're going to be handled as important only. So if you're a medium-sized Annex 1 company, then you are going to be considered important. And you can still be considered essential if you are part of the NIS1 directive, so if you're in scope there, or if you're considered a critical entity based on the Critical Entity Directive. This directive I'm not going to touch here, but just as a quick information, this is about cyber resilience, and it's addressing cyber physical risks. So safety is going to be included there as well, where the NIS directive is more logical security. And OT is kind of in between, so it will be addressed by both directives in combination. The NIS1 directive just makes sure that if you are part of the CERT directive, essential critical entities, you are going to be considered essential for NIS2. And yeah, so that's like the big picture. It is noteworthy that Annex 2, so you are going to be potentially important, is including a wide variety of manufacturing industries. And this is just a high-level summary that you can see here, but this is for the first time manufacturing is going to get in scope step by step. So the question is, what does it mean if you're essential or important? And so in general, you can say that the basic requirements are establishing and executing cybersecurity risk management measures. So this is like security controls. The second big requirement is to implement and execute an incident reporting around severe incidents. And so this is what everybody has to do. However, essential entities are continuously reviewed if they comply, where important entities are only going to be reviewed when there are indicators of non-compliance. And these indicators could be there was a security event made public or data has been lost, for example. and it is severe, and the entity did not inform government bodies. So this would be an indicator of non-compliance. So the non-compliance is related to both these domains that have to be covered. If this, basically, if there are deficiencies identified, a review is performed for the important ones, and for the essential ones, the review is performed regularly anyway. So yeah, and the logic here is that the supervision and enforcement and also the penalties are going to be more severe for the essential entities than they are for the important ones, but I can tell you that the difference is not that big. They are pretty strict for both of them. And let's go a little bit more into the different requirements A and B here. So these risk management measures that have to be in place are basically kind of categorized here a little bit. So we have organizational measures, security policies, training, etc. Then we have security measures around endpoint network. So asset management, for example, also has just recently been added. Cyber hygiene, which includes patching, not too many user accounts, not too many services, kind of hardening a little bit. Of course, we have patch and vulnerability management included. A backup management is required because it's also covering business continuity and disaster recovery. And yeah, then supply chain has been included as well. So being aware of the risks in the supply chain. The challenge with this is a little bit that these are minimum requirements. So the member states will be able to add additional ones, and these requirements are not necessarily nicely integrated or like directly building on each other. So for this, it could make sense to just take a look on when to expect the next step. So it will be formulated and documented in greater detail in end of 2024. This is when the requirements are going to be defined by the member states. And then technically we know then what we have to comply to. However, if you look into these requirements, you can select a couple of standards which would fit. One I would like to address here because it's a relatively high level and easy one. Is going to be the NIST cybersecurity framework. And here I did a mapping. So on the right side, you see the NIS2 requirements and in which category they would fit in NIST, in the NIST cybersecurity framework. And the benefit of this approach is that this NIST framework gives a little bit more context, a little bit more information on what is expected. So for example, if we look at response here, yeah, we take a look at the mitigation in the red box. Basically, incident handling is what NIS2 says. NIST says incidents are contained, incidents are mitigated, they are identified. So it gives a little more context. However, one of the questions was how would NIS2 compare to other standards? And I would say it's possible to integrate into existing standards, and it's, by the way, also supported. So a paragraph in the regulation, in the directive, says specifically existing frameworks can be applied. So it's fine to do that, to prepare that. I would say if you compare that to something like IEC 62443, if you are in that space already active, then I think map it. Most companies probably will not be, and for them, the NIST cybersecurity framework is a little easier to understand. It leaves more room for interpretation. It is more widely accepted, and it is for OT. So yeah, at the end, it's up to you. This is just a recommendation, but it's kind of nicely mapping into that. So this was one requirement. Now let's come to the next one. The reporting, incident reporting. So first of all, top right, what has to be reported at all? So only significant incidents have to be reported. Significant means it has a significant impact on the services provided, or it's imposing a financial risk, which is significant, or it's impacting material or immaterial natural and legal persons. So if it's impacting other companies, could be considered significant. And here a set of reports has to be provided by the entity in a specific time frame. So there's an early warning that has to be provided after 24 hours after the entity is aware a severe incident happened. And basically you can see in the middle column here what information are requested. They are not forcefully requested at that point, but this 27-hour initial incident notification, this one already should include additional information like the severity of the impact. Indicators of compromise are already asked for, if available. The idea is that this information is then basically taken and shared with your peers in your industry or with your clients, or can also be made public. So the initial idea here is really to have something like an early warning to share the information. This also implies that you as an organization have to prepare to receive reports from your industry peers and to react to them. So at any time, the government can also request an intermediate report. So in case of a more complex incident, or you don't know what exactly is going on, you're still, okay. So after a month, after the initial notification has been provided, a final report is expected. And here they are very detailed, very specific, sorry. A description of the incident, severity and impact has to be included. Root cause analysis, outcome has to be included. And mitigation measures. So, and also, of course, it's impacting cross-border. So that is a lot to ask for. And should you be at that point, should you be still under impact of the incident or under attack, in that case, this is not a final, but a progression report, and you have to provide a final report 1 month after the incident handling is finished. So these are basically the reporting requirement and the second big block. Should you not comply to any of these reporting duties or security risk management measures, you can face basically supervision and more. Let's go into a scenario here. So when NIS2 is in effect, you can face a targeted security review because your industry is considered important and critical and under a threat. So this can happen anytime. And by the way, you're going to pay for that. You should have in place an asset management, which is one of the required measurements. You should perform a risk review yourself. So it will be reviewed. Are you identifying your risks yourself? Do you perform a kind of cyber hygiene? And this can be interpreted in various ways. So yeah, cyber hygiene can be a lot, but it's more, could be considered baseline security activities you would perform, but can already be a challenge in operational environments. And then the more advanced step would be business continuity management. So of course, do you have backup management in place and disaster recovery? So all of this basically is you can proactively manage before anything happens. Now let's assume a breach takes place. You don't get insights from your operational network and you are not aware that something was changed. An access was granted, configuration was changed. If you would be able to identify this, you would be able to initiate countermeasures and ultimately prevent the significant incident. Let's just assume we don't have this information right now. So a final change is made and a system is compromised, will lead to a service outage, which you will realize earlier or later in time. So at that point now, you have to prepare a report, and basically from now on, you lose the control of the process. Now you are subject to being reviewed, and now basically you lost the initiative. So this is what to expect to come. So you will have to share this information with your clients, potentially with mitigation measures. You can also be asked to make the incident public. You have to perform an incident analysis, response, and recover. And then you're going to be supervised on, well, did you perform as expected, and did you perform in the right time frame or not? So government bodies can issue on-site inspections and binding instructions to you. Then penalties are going to be basically defined, fines, and then a review is performed on how you actually responded to that. So this is like the last step. So you again, you know, if should you not comply to the binding instructions, for example, then this will be supervised again. So at that point, you should be scared of what is coming here, especially because all these arrows on the right side where you lost the initiative are going to be prepared over the next 18 months. The laws are going to be prepared. The government entities are going to be created, or the duties are going to be added to existing entities. And so basically, the government is going to be ready for you to supervise you and also penalize. But that's not the end. So what could happen is this picture represents the supervision activities on the basically enforcement capabilities and the fines. I will just highlight a couple of aspects which are important. So the upper portion of the picture is representing important and essential entities. So this is like the baseline, what to expect in any case. The bottom portion is just additional enforcement and fines for the essential entities. And this is where basically both differ. Just highlight enforcement of violations. So you have to remediate incidents within a deadline, expect a deadline, or implement audit recommendations within a deadline. So this is already severe. However, the essential entities face a different level of enforcement of a violation. Here, the CEO or legal representative level can temporarily be prohibited to execute or exercise management function. And on top of that, a monitoring officer will be defined that is basically monitoring the entity to oversee the compliance. And also the fines here are pretty severe. So the text says a maximum of at least. So that can be interpreted as this is the minimum, what to expect. It can be higher. How much higher, we don't know, because this is again decided by the member states. But it's 1.4% of the global turnover, or 7 million, whichever is higher. So this is for important entities that violate the directive. The essential entities face 2% of their global turnover, or 10 million, whichever is higher. And this is, by the way, this is the minimum. So it can get higher. Aspects which will increase the fees are the severity of and duration of the infringement, repeated violations, failure to notify government bodies, not providing, well, willingly provide wrong information, previous infringements, and on the helpful side, we have if you took measures that prevent or mitigate damage, then this will be counted for you. and the same if you cooperate. So yeah, this is basically the impact that you can face. Let me check quickly if we have a question. Okay. Yet. So, wow, hold on, that was too much. So what are going to be the key challenges for the NIS2 directive? First of all, prepare to be reviewed. And also prepare to establish a security risk management. You have to understand your risks, and this has an impact, which we will cover on the bottom for operational environments. Prepare to report, but also prepare to receive reports on potential risks, threats, etc. Another challenging aspect here is that these measures are going to be defined in detail end of 24 and early 25, the NIS2 becomes fully effective, including, like ad hoc audits, etc. So technically you don't have much time. So it is a good idea to start dealing with what do these measurements mean and what can I do to cover them. And so there's not much time for that. And ultimately to develop processes, procedures, also pre-select technology, supporting technology for that also takes some time. And you just have like 18 months, a little bit more time to do that. So let me check questions. Yeah. So what would be the natural next steps to take? So let's assume you don't have like a risk management in place right now for your industrial environment. So one of the essential first steps is to understand where you actually are. So you select the framework, and a framework that is fitting, of course, that has these aspects covered, which provides a little more detail on what to expect, and you perform a self-assessment. And in order to perform the self-assessment, you actually need to, for example, have a working communication between IT and OT. So IT and OT have to work together for this. You have to know what to protect. So you basically need the asset management that the NIS2 is requesting to establish has to contain the assets which are critical for the process that you operate or the services you provide. Cyber risks have to be managed, but also their remediation. So it's not going to be good enough to mention there's a threat, we have a risk, and we didn't do anything. The next step is you have to prepare to not be able to apply, especially if you're from the IT security side. In OT, you sometimes cannot deploy the most obvious control. You have to work around because there are restrictions. And last but not least, breaches have to be identified, reviewed, and then you need the communication as well. Okay, let me touch at the IT-OT, basically collaboration. The status quo is that engineers, OT engineers, basically have to split their priorities between a couple of critical tasks. And so that's operational uptime, that's safety, and security is the third priority in most cases. So keep that in mind. The expertise, the security expertise in that space is not as extensive as in the IT world. And however, that doesn't mean you can override, because IT security people, on the other hand, have similar challenges. They are usually not aware on what's at risk, and insecure by design. You can't really fight that, except you find something to prevent and that could not be obvious to an IT security person. Also, the networks are different. And so just keep in mind that a lot of IT security-driven initiatives in the OT space led, in fact, to a higher risk because the security controls itself were a risk to operations. And at the end, operations is reliable for the uptime of the process, not IT. And for the incident detection and analysis, and especially the response, a good IT-OT joint partnership is essential, because you will need the resources from both sides in a severe event. You need the expertise about security, about forensics, maybe, and about the process on the other side. And you have two different targets. Operation has the target to get back up and running as quick as possible, where security has the target to identify to perform a root cause analysis and identify the root cause. So this needs to be aligned and should be aligned from the beginning. And by leaving out one of the sides, I would say there's potential for a tension. From our perspective, what works well is to have a IT-OT collaboration where you exchange information, where you help each other, and also have clear responsibilities. Also have incident management process that is coordinated between IT and OT. And when evaluating security technologies in that space, that should be done with operational staff included, because the technology needs to be maintained at some point, and also, the value might have a different, the value is seen differently if you look at it from an IT or an operational perspective. And so also keep in mind, it's always OT's fault if the production outage happens because of an engineering mistake, or if it happens because of the IT security department deployed something or made a change or reconfigured a network device. So it's always going to be the OT fault. So that's a really important step, and you cannot start with that early enough. And I would suggest to include and exchange, communicate. Get used to it, because in case of an incident, you have to. Okay, so let's move over to the next topic. So we talked about organizational aspects to be considered. The next step now is to look more into, okay, so how do we know what we actually have to protect? So NIS2 mentions this as basically manage your assets, but in order to manage them, to manage the risk, you have to know what you're actually managing. So asset inventory in OT can be a challenge. So because we don't only have IT kind of systems, so operating system based, but we also have network gear, which can be configured differently than IT knows. And we have different types of networks. IT is usually not familiar with. And we also have embedded device. And embedded device can have more embedded device, behind the backplane. And ideally, we get information about all these assets, because it helps us to determine the risk much more exact. And also, ideally, we get this information from the endpoint itself, rather than based on the assumption that when it's communicating, it's alive. And if it's not communicating, it's not existing. So the approach in the past has been, we just listen to which communication is going on, and based on this information, we extract which assets are potentially there. However, that lead to a situation that some assets simply never showed up because they didn't communicate, but they were there the whole time, like, for example, safety systems. And these are ones you want to address. You want to know what is the risk environment for these systems, because they can have a critical impact. So one of the important first steps is basically to have a robust basis of an asset library that is reliable, and that also should be up to date. So it should be possible to have this like a more or less real-time representation. And that's the first step. But in order to make a real risk assessment, you need more information from these endpoints. And here, the amount of information you can collect, or basically these endpoints can share with us, differ. And so this approach here is basically based on Verve experience, on what works well over time. So what works well is to receive these information that you can see on the right side from the endpoint directly. And you already get an idea that we want to know the hardware ID if that's accessible, the software that is installed, the services that are running, vulnerabilities that are existing, patches that have not been applied. We want a risk picture on all of this because it allows us to identify the risks much better and to prioritize our activities afterwards. And a lot of these aspects are actually mentioned in this too. So user account management, for example. Backup, is a backup performed? Great. If a backup has been performed or is actually performed or has recently been performed, the risk is maybe a little bit lower. We can get back up to operation much quicker. So, and last but not least, it would also be very helpful to know, is this specific asset here essential to the critical process or not? So, and this is information usually the operational side has. So this is what we call a 360-degree picture on the risk. And this allows to prevent an incident because we know the risk in advance and can mitigate it. But also in case of, like changes or a new vulnerability, not a new vulnerability, but more like a substantial weakness, such as Log4j, compromised library. We want to be able to identify the systems which actually have this piece of software running, and we want to mitigate the risk in one way or the other. So this is now basically the risk management basis that we get. However, the challenge here is we cannot just change something. We cannot just patch. And in many cases, you cannot patch each and every vulnerability because these systems are sometimes managed and operated by OEMs. And sometimes OEMs say, no, you can't apply the patch. It's not secure for our process control. So you have to know to have this information and you have to work around that. And because of this amount of security context data that you get, you're actually able to work around that. However, to work around that has another challenge. As we mentioned before, the OT security has resource restrictions. Always, it's a conflict of targets that have to be achieved. And so we have to be very careful in do we train an operational engineer on security analytics, or do we centralize this maybe better? So, and this is one of the basically one of the challenges. We have the data that is coming from maybe a local plant that is very deep in the operational network and can be critical for us to analyze, to be aware of, to identify a risk, maybe a systemic risk for us. This data needs to be somehow consolidated at some point. And based on this risk data, a decision is made on what is the best measure, how to react to that. What are our options? But this is the picture on the right side. If you cannot just push a change into the operational environment. This is never going to be accepted. You need actually an operator on site to take control over the remediation process. And this is something that we support, we built into our software solution. And so it is possible to basically receive all critical data, to have it analyzed, to have it, maybe compensating controls can already be identified at a regional level. And then suggested to like a central security management instance. They review, they suggest a change to be performed, maybe across a couple of plans. And the execution at the end is triggered by the operator on site that is basically standing next to the machine. And this way we have an integration of IT knowledge and operational engineering, and the basically the control of the process is still kept with the engineers. And that's a very accepted approach to it. And in fact, it's probably the only one that's going to be accepted. Yeah, so these were insights into, you know, basically receiving substantial security data and performing actions. However, so the challenge, if you are active in that space, the challenge not only is to be able to identify vulnerabilities, the challenge also is to prioritize your activities. And for this, I would like to show you that picture here. So this is a typical entity in that space. You can see vulnerability counts. On the top left, we have vulnerability counts, which are, you know, which represent server-based vulnerabilities and network-based vulnerabilities. And there will be exploits available and maybe targeted attacks even. And so these are on the top left picture. So basically you want to know which of your vulnerabilities are have been part in a targeted attack in exploit code that is actually existing. And you maybe want to report on that. But I guess the major takeaway here is the sheer amount of vulnerabilities. You will probably not be able to remove all existing vulnerabilities in these environments. You have to prioritize. So just to be very clear, our challenge is not that the vulnerability information we get might not be correct or might be a false positive. We are kind of steps forward from that. The challenge that we see is how to best prioritize your vulnerability analysis. And so here you can see that basically from 31,000 vulnerabilities, we went down to 308 critical vulnerabilities, which have no backup, which have no application whitelisting, and maybe no basic system hardening. And it can be extended. You can say, okay, I want to make sure that the user, there shouldn't be more than 10 user accounts on each system. So that could be added. But it allows us to basically reduce the amount of vulnerabilities that really need to address, because these 308 are going to be highly critical. You have no basically second or third level of security protection here. If these are exploited, your system is going to be lost. And if you don't even have a backup or have this information, then you probably have to reset up the system by hand, which takes more time, is not efficient. So it's a high risk. So yeah, this is just to give you an idea on the importance of prioritizing the activities. You have to focus on what is the highest risk. Vulnerabilities is just one side. So let's take a look now at available patches. So it's also not only the information that how many patches do actually are missing on a system. The more interesting question is which patches actually are remediating a vulnerability or removing a weakness. And so this is another screenshot from our tool. So basically you can see here that the on the left side, well, first of all, you can see that here is a system that has more than 70 patches missing. And then the question is, how do you prioritize? You will probably not be able to, deploy 70 patches to this system, and a couple of them might even not be allowed. So then basically the next look is on the bottom. Okay, with which patches are gonna basically remove most severe vulnerabilities? And that's where you want to prioritize your activities on. So the vulnerability amount and the patches were basically just shown so that you get an idea on the importance to prioritize, and that it is not only about amount of vulnerabilities. We assume the vulnerabilities that we find are no fails positives, they are there. And we assume that the amount of patches are all valid. The challenge is not to find that number. The challenge is to how to prioritize. And you basically can go through OT from different angles. You will always run into these challenges. You have to prioritize because a lot of stuff cannot be done as an IT. And yeah, so with that, I have one more example. Okay, so we talked about we have vulnerabilities which do not have a compensating control, or we have a risk and we cannot apply a patch because for whatever reason. So then what is done in audit is basically you look at what is the next closest measure or control you could deploy to address the risk in a similar way. So if you cannot patch a system, you may be able to prevent access to that system for a wide variety of different accounts. You maybe want to restrict or improve the security on the system to have a more extended authentication, or include or extend the password lengths, or want to close down specific services, which would be addressed by the vulnerability. So all of these are compensating controls. And yeah, we provide basically an overview of that. So you can see on a system by system basis on the basically compensating, well, it's more a security configuration, and you basically can have an overview on how secure, how compliant to your security baseline is your environment. And this allows just to reduce the risk surface of your endpoints as well. And yeah, so, and this last but not least now, so no matter if your initial assessment basically shows there's not much, there's success is possible. So you can move up in your expertise in covering different measures. My recommendation would be to not overstress the organization. Don't start everything at once. Go step by step. Basically build stepwise up. There will be areas where you perform good, and there will be areas where you have a challenge. Just make sure you keep improving. And with that, I come to, before we start the question and answers, I go to the final notes. So what to expect from NIS? So NIS has an impact on the entities. The requirements are written basically in an audit-ready way, so they can be audited and they will be audited. For the essential entities, they will be audited in any case. For the important entities, they're going to be audited when there's an indicator that this should be done. And yeah, you're also going to be compared to your industry. So this will raise the security level across an industry over time, for sure. So expect increasing security requirements. Basically, the directive also requires a active security and risk management. So you have to know the risk. It will be checked if the risk has been identified and agreed on, and what the countermeasures towards this risk are going to be. So it's basically, because of this, you also have to take action. So to identify a risk or a vulnerability or a deficiency and not take action is not going to be good enough anymore. What countermeasures you initiate, how you deal with the risks, all of this will require a take action portion to it. So expect that to come. And concerning the fees, just keep in mind the percentage of global revenue represents, for the important entities, it represents 5 days of production to the market price. That's 5 days of global production, if it's not more than 10 million. No, sorry, it's just take that. If it's a huge corporation, it's going to be minimum 5 days of production revenue globally. And for the essential entities, it's going to be even more. It's going to be 1 week of global production at sales price. And this is the minimum penalty that you can expect. Also, as a final note to mention, the directive, we just touched the entities here, but the directive has a significant impact on the member states itself and on the European organization of an exchange of critical information. So basically 2 takeaways here. The first one is NIS2 can be extended in absolutely all directions. Be it, like include small corporations as well. Also may it be adding additional industries to that picture, moving between these industries, between being important up into being essential. There's all kind of flexibility. And also to mention, in fact, the NIS2 directive is closely related to the critical entity resilience directive, the SIR directive. They go kind of hand in hand. And they also link to the data protection regulation. And then there are a couple of security regulations coming up, but one that is worked on right now is around embedded system security. So this is really just the beginning of a bigger initiative. And so it's definitely so the target of the European Union that was announced like a couple of years ago was to have the best security in place worldwide. And it seems like from a regulatory perspective, the Commission is heading that way. You have a couple of months time left to prepare for this, but you should act now. And with this, I'm gonna, let me check if there are questions. Oh, and please feel free to reach out to us in case you have questions. Happy to answer them. So let's see. One moment. Okay, are the requirements based on any industry standard? Such as NIST, yeah, okay. I think this, well, I would say no, they're not one-to-one based on NIST or even 62443. They are much more high level. And so the NIS2 measures are a little more fragmented. So if you're not familiar with, not an expert in security, it will be tough to link these requirements because some are building on each other, and so you need a good basis. My recommendation still would be to go with a standard that is, number one, widely accepted, number two, can be interpreted, and of course, number two as well, has to cover a significant amount of the measures that are suggested or well, going to be the minimum requirements from NIS2. And I can say that NIS, the cybersecurity framework, is approximately going to cover 98% of the requirements as they are today. And it is high level. You know, it's easy to read. It's easy to understand. It provides guidance on which steps should be included, which aspects should be considered. For example, if you have an incident, you want to isolate it. You know, you want to make sure it's not spreading. This is not mentioned in NIS2. However, this would be something that you want to consider as an aspect to cover. And so ultimately, it's up to you. But I think for OT security, the cybersecurity framework is pretty good, especially because the supply chain coverage has been added to that and is providing, I mean, it's providing like 15 controls on supply chain security, and the NIS2 directive just gives, you know, like 3 or 4 sentences on what they're looking for, and it's really high level. 62443 is great if you have the resources, but if you start with that topic or have to address, you know, cybersecurity across different geographies, and you will probably not have the expertise everywhere, then you will run into challenges here. So I guess ultimately, if you do 62443 already, it could be worth checking. To my knowledge, the cybersecurity framework is a little more widely accepted, also because it's, I think it's 2% of the size, so it's consumable. Okay, let's see another question. Okay, you mentioned that we will know in 2024 what the requirements are as defined by the member states. Will some member states implement this prior to the deadline? Okay, that's an important question. Yes. So basically the deadline, October 24, is going to be the latest. No member state will have their regulation up, their entities defined and trained after October 24. And there will be countries or member states which will come up with a detailed framework earlier. How much earlier, we don't know, but October is the latest deadline. And okay, I think there was another question. So will the so that's one of the questions we received when people submitted to participate in the webinar. Will the required people with security skills actually be available for the companies, for the entities? And this is also, it's a really good question, because no, they will not. You will have to deal with what you have today. And this is the reason why having an effective security program with as much sensible automation and insights and valuable insights is going to be the key. So you can automate, and basically the information I shared with you, the screenshots, this information is collected in a completely automated way. So companies will have to evaluate the technological possibilities and also reuse knowledge they have existing in their organization already. To staff this with security people is in Europe is not going to be possible, especially because the managed security service providers are also going to be in scope and considered essential. So they have to increase their security as well and have to document it and are going to be subject to a review. So let me check if there was a very recent question. Do you foresee that organizations will need NIS2 officers? Yes, absolutely. It can be part of the compliance management, but you definitely need one person that is responsible. This is a requirement. So one person has to have the power and being held responsible by the government to comply to NIS. And you also need maybe the same person that is doing the communication, so communicating the compliance, your risk assessment outcome, if requested, but also receiving incident reports. You don't want that to be, like totally different communication streams into your organization. You want to orchestrate that, and we want to control that. So the answer is yes. For various tasks, it's suggested. I guess it's a definitely good idea to have a person responsible for NIS2. And the other one, someone was wondering if we are already, sorry. Okay, self-assessments, if we have, so the question is if we do have self-assessments available. No, it's basically with the actual text of the regulation, you really have to think, okay, which framework could I use that would not be NIS2? NIS2 says you are free to adapt an existing and accepted framework to comply to NIS, but it has to fit. So I would suggest take a look at the cybersecurity framework. There's a lot of material available, and you can perform a self-assessment. They have Excel sheets to do that, and that gives you like a first good idea. And you can leave out the aspects which are not NIS2 relevant, and that would be a quick suggestion. Okay, so I think we are at the end now. Thanks a lot for listening, and feel free to reach out to us, and have a great evening, have a great morning, wherever you are.